That was Dr. David Sanoff. Dave, that's fascinating stuff. Wow.
I was wondering if you could hear that last note.
Yes, it was pretty subtle. Dr. Rodney Penniman, did you hear that?
I did indeed.
Mm, 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 mm. David, I was listening to you and I was saying to myself that why is it that music just makes somebody relax? What is it about it? It's an energy. What do you think? It is a
Well, let me
I've
say
wondered
this.
about that.
Let me back up a second here and let's welcome our fellow active imagination travelers
yeah.
who have been traveling along with us, or maybe you've just joined us in our journey and exploration of active imagination. And so we're now focusing on the topic of active imagination and music. And so as we began this particular session with David playing the flute, and so yeah, thinking about the influence of music on our imaginations. We know that in Jungian psychology, uh, active imagination is really looked upon as a method of engaging with the unconscious through images and fantasies and symbols. And so when you hear those flutes, once again, where does that take us? Music can be especially instrumental in stimulating the unconscious. Or whether, sometimes there might have been we hear music, it takes us back to a childhood song, or a particular piece of music or song that has some significance to us. You know, for those of us that have are married or just love music in general, what does hearing that music bring up? What does it elicit in the
Sure.
unconscious?
Yes.
So, and it also brings up deep emotions. Music has the ability to heal, and sometimes we get it makes us happy, or it may make us tearful, depending on that unconscious memory of that particular song. I love music, and so I listen to all varieties of type of music. My late mother was a ballet teacher, and so she owned a ballet studio, and so I grew up hearing a lot of music, a lot of classical music, and every time I hear different songs, classical songs, it takes me back to to my childhood and watching my mother as she practiced ballet and taught her students. If we look at the significance of the flute, we can focus on the breath and the life force that's important, that's needed with this wind powered instrument, as David is breathing and pushing air into the flute. It represents the breath of life or spirit, which I think is really important. When in meditation, we're taught to focus on our breathing. Breathe in or breathe out. Utilize cleansing breaths. Those types of things when it comes to breathing. It can be with the sound of the flute. Various high tones. You asked us, Stein, at the end. That high note that uh, David reached. What is it? What does it suggest? Is it somewhat of an innocence or nature or connection to the soul? What's the significance of those tones and those sounds that we hear? Uh, we know that there's the flute, the pan, the used, and Krishna played the flute. We know that in various religious types of uses, shamanic use of flutes and what have you can be utilized. And in dreams or active imagination, we can think of this sounds of a flute that might guide us, or some messengers or what have you that might come to mind. So, and then finally, I'm going to say listening to the flute music during active imagination can help those inner landscapes. A lot of times, Stein, you focused on the internal, what is going on inside of you, what is going on with your heart and your lungs and your blood flow, of your blood. And so
Yes,
a lot of
yes,
times I
yes.
think so that flute can stimulate that
Yeah, that's it.
inner landscape. Uh,
That's good.
and I would say finally, it can help us in terms of different sceneries. Perhaps playing by a figure or echoing from a distant place that really prompts us into some symbolic exploration. So we know that Jung talked about archetypes. Excuse me. And so what is the flute? Is the flute some type of archetype that allows us or takes us to uh, promote some type of symbolic exploration of this whole
A
music.
sort
So
of representation of the wind, for instance.
yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
So those are my thoughts.
When you spoke of the organs of the body briefly before we return to David, because David has to say something here, I thought of the brain, the liver, the kidney, the heart, the lungs, the intestines, and the skin. The alchemists in Jungian psychology speak of the significance of the number seven and the seven organs. Music has an energy and it has a way. That is why active imagination calls us not to come so much with our human knowledge, but to come to an experience. And I think that's what the flute hits certain energy centers. It can calm the musician. Rodney, you spoke of the breath. I mean, the flute as an instrument. As you were talking about the breath, it reminds me of the idea of psychology, which in its earliest meanings have much to do with behavior. It was purely about breath. And when a community gathered to worship and to pray and to sing, and somebody sneezed, it meant that the gods had arrived because the sneeze was sort of an advanced breath, particularly so in African societies. So the idea of psychology and the breath is so rich. And with all of that is exude. Then there's also the idea that the player of the instrument, him or herself, may also exude all of that impacts deeper layers of the imagination. So I just thought I'd add this to what Rodney said. But David, I guess you have something to respond.
Well, yeah, I was thinking from the point of view of the person playing, like in today me playing. One thing that I think about is playing with feeling, and I've always wondered, I can produce a certain kind of feeling, but how does that, how does my inner life or like if I felt a certain way, maybe some other way from which I do feel, I could maybe project something else, but I only feel one way in one moment or however I am in the moment. Maybe other sense that I'm more of a channel for other things that aren't even necessarily maybe mine. So, for example, you were talking, Rodney, about the breath, and of course, a lot of ancient meditations, Hindu or Buddhist meditations involve, the Hindus say pranayamas, and they breathe. They have maybe different patterns of breathing out of different nostrils, so many in, so many out, and in Zen Buddhist meditation, you focus on the breath, seeing the breath go in and out. And one thing that I've always thought is this really is related to our connection with others and with history. So if you think of like people like Jung, or going even further back, Jesus, or even further back, Buddha, or even further back, Krishna, all these people that we talk about throughout history, just think they breathed in some molecules of air, maybe oxygen, hydrogen, whatever is in the air, carbon dioxide, some different molecules, and then they breathe in and then they breathe out. And some of those molecules of oxygen or carbon or whatever they were went out into the atmosphere and swirled around. and they swirl around. Other people breathe them in and breathe them out. So when you breathe out right now, there's a chance that you're breathing in some molecule of oxygen or hydrogen or CO2 or whatever it is. You breathe in something that Buddha, Jesus, Krishna, Carl Jung, whoever, they breathe that in and breathe it out, and you're breathing it now. So we are all connected through this one kind of thing. And then we're also connected, according to Jung, by the collective unconscious. And so what is our experience in the moment, and how can that go from one mind to the other? So just now when I was playing, one thing you might have noticed is I closed my eyes, and when I closed my eyes, I saw something that I don't usually see. I saw a bunch of white light, like kind of these these white shapes that were, maybe they might have been circles, or maybe they're almost like something, like some of you see these telescopes that go far out in the galaxy, like somewhere way out in the universe where there's these different white shapes of stars, or I don't know what they were, but I was seeing these different white shapes in a black background. And so, what is that? I don't know what that is, or where does it come from? It's not really mine necessarily, because the collective unconscious, through that, we're all connected to each other, and
Let
perhaps.
me tell you a little bit. Let me tell you a little bit about this. When I started doing looking at active imagination, and Rodney knows, and David came to know, it was because of a visual impairment that I had. And I was at a university looking at the subject and the matter. And I began to look inward, what David was just describing, uh, to what do you see? And so images, uh, and these are images that I may know, things I may recognize. Um, these are also maybe archetypes, what Jung call archetypes. These are maybe things from another age, from another time, as old as human biology, because the so-called imaginatory matters of imagination of the unconscious are rooted deep in the very body of the very organs of the person. So a person who is listening to what we're doing now is part and parcel of what we're really we're talking about. You can begin to feel a connection with us because you have organs like us, and they receive certain. So it's very, very interesting. But basically, it was because of a visual impairment, I began to look inward, and images began to appear, colors of white against black, green elements, structures, buildings. Um, but I was calling them that. But I came to understand something through these images and these pictures, which I think Jung said should flow naturally through a process of active imagination. But of course, I got into here because of a vision of heaven, and I began to understand it from the way that had been suggested by these European psychologists and psychoanalysts, and right down to our own Caribbean Frantz Fanon, you see, who wrote significant critiques of those things. But certainly, just to say what is nice about this and what is beautiful about understanding these things is what Rodney always called a sort of social justice factor. It is in everyone. It is in everyone's reach. It is everyone's gift to have, to have an organs in your body. You're alive. How do they receive vibration? How do they understand and make you healthier? And I just thought I'd throw this in, Jen. That's a very interesting discussion.
Yeah. I just wanted to say one thing about the flute itself. Rodney was talking about flutes, and I've got a very modern flute. And this flute was made by a company called Haynes, the Haynes Company near Boston, and they've been there they're the oldest flute maker in the United States. So this is a very good flute. It's based on a lot of history, but it's still, if you can look, there's still places. These six fingers are touching six particular places, and you see it fits in the human hand here, and you
Mhm.
blow in.
Yeah.
So this, me blowing in here, and these six fingers being in this place, that's the same place where ancient flutes made out of bamboo or
Yeah.
reed, or cane, or even bones from cavemen. The holes are in the same place because of the human
Mhm.
hand. So this is a
Yeah.
the music is created by humans because of
Mm,
our biology. The way our hands are, the size and shape of our hands will lead to those kind of notes. And same with a guitar or a stringed instrument where you're pressing your fingers in certain places and that makes the notes. There's a certain space in there that so it's a very human thing. And I love the flute and I picked it as the instrument to stick with because I've tried others, trumpet, saxophone, guitar. I can still play, a little bit of those, but I specialize in the flute recently because I love the ancientness of it. The fact that some of the oldest instruments are little bones in caves that flutes that cavemen played, and like Rodney said, Krishna and Pan, some of these ancient figures, I'm Jewish, and the Jewish religion there was the old temple, and supposedly the Jewish flute players would play at the temple before sunset to call the people to worship because the flute was considered the sweetest instrument, and those were those very simple cane flutes with the one hole to blow in and six finger holes. And those are still made today. Bamboo flutes are made like that today. I've played one.
mm.
In fact, the first flute that I played was a bamboo flute like that, and I started playing that in California back in around 1970.
Voice, voice is also a wonderful instrument. And just imagine how close voice is to breath. If I could say, for instance, if I said, my skin is black upon me. Now, how did I do that? And my bones. So there is a lot to be said for culturing what is inside. And I sharing this with much thanks, and I'm happy that we're doing this and we've started off this with such grace. So gentlemen, I mean we're almost coming up to the half an hour portion of the first part of our this discourse. What are we thinking now? I mean, what happened with the music and active imagination?
Well, I was thinking to start calling David the Pied Piper.
Pepper made a stage name for me. I made an album during COVID, like remotely, with a guy from Chicago, and he told me he called himself the Jazz Master, and he said I needed a stage name, so Pepper renamed me. She calls me Doctor Got to Play.
Doctor got to play. That's funny because that is one of the things you would do when we both were teaching at Webster. uh, David would bring his flute to class and
Yeah.
oftentimes play for his students. I guess as a method to kind of soothe them and calm them down because oftentimes they would be coming in from their clinical sites and maybe had a little stressful day. And David, was that your intent on bringing your flute to school with you?
Well, maybe that was part of it. Another thing I used it was to demonstrate the Jungian concept of the collective unconscious. I would have them pair off and have see some images that the flute stimulated, and each pair of people would end up going to the same place. Like two people who are together would go to the beach, two people go to the mountains, two people would
Okay.
go to a market, two people would go to a dance somewhere. So
Gentlemen,
they were together in
gentlemen,
mind.
let us let that be our second discussion. So let us meet, if we can meet on Friday. Why don't we let this, how did we three meet, be part two of our discussion?
That sounds like
Oh, well, sure.
I
I'm
find
up for
that
that.
sounds very interesting.
Yeah. Well, it fits with Pepper's suggestion of Doctor Got to Play.
I think so.
But no, I think that's fine. I think
well, I mean, I
think
could say that goes back to my childhood. I could tell you that story.
Yes, there's a lot.
so.
Because
So
how Rodney and I met would be interesting for you to hear, David, how you and Rodney met and how you and I mean, it would be really interesting. Really wonderful to just talk about that. Okay.
I remember not
Well,
only how we met, but how we became friends.
yes. Well, David, play us a flute on our way out, I think. You
Yeah,
can
let's
give
have
us
a few closing
a name.
notes. Close your eyes and see what you can see.
Okay, man.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, that one was a little different than the first, but wonderful, as they say in
Yeah,
German.
yeah, yeah.